Okay, in my previous video, I went through a lot of the general information of the vertebral column, then got into this slide where we were discussing the difference between a cervical, a thoracic, and a lumbar vertebrae. One thing I forgot to mention with a cervical vertebrae or with cervical vertebrae, C1 to C7. C1 is the atlas, C2 is the axis. I'm going to talk about those here in a minute. But C7, if you run your fingers along the base of your neck, okay, run your fingers along the base of your neck, you will feel this large bump at the base of your neck. That large bump is actually bump is going to actually be this big long spinous process of C7. So you can actually identify where your cervical ends and your thoracic begins within your vertebral column. So just something interesting that you can feel on yourself as you're studying, as you're trying to learn a little bit more about the vertebral column. Okay, so now. Remember, we talked about how the cervical vertebrae are the only ones with these transverse foramen. They're a lot smaller bodies. The thoracic vertebrae are going to have a little bit larger transverse processes with the facets that will articulate with the ribs. The bodies have gotten a little bit bigger. And then finally, we get to the lumbar vertebrae that have a very large body. And they, again, do not have transverse foramen and don't have the facets that the ribs will go ahead and attach to. All right. So now we get to this, the atlas and the axis, C1 and C2. All right, these guys have really special names because they have really special jobs. So looking first on the left-hand side, and again, all these notes are in your packet, but the atlas is C1. C1, first cervical vertebrae is the atlas. They call it that because there's this, I don't really know what this is. I don't know if it's Greek or Roman or some sort of god. Not Roman, that would make sense. This guy named Atlas, and Atlas had to carry the whole weight of the world on his shoulders. So if you've ever been to the Arnold Classic down in Columbus, they have this statue all over, this really strong guy holding the world. That is Atlas. So Atlas is this really small vertebrae, but it's holding the whole weight of the head. All right. The atlas has no body. All right. So this pink part is actually supposed to represent this on the axis, and I'll get to that in a minute. But you notice how there's not a body like you would see on a typical vertebrae. There is transverse foramen. These things, now specifically, they're going to allow some arteries, carotid artery, to get to the brain. And we'll talk more about that with the cardiovascular system. But this is the first vertebrae. It is C1. Now, the atlas articulates with these things. It's superior articular facets. Those things are concave. All right. They're concave because the occipital condyles at the base of the skull on either side of the foramen magnum are going to sit right on top of these things here and here. I can get my pointer out. Sorry. So here and here, that those articulate with the occipital condyles. Now you go to C2 or the axis, and we have this weird thing here. This is called the odontoid process or the dens, D-E-N-S. Okay, this thing actually sits up inside of the atlas. So you see, this right here is this right here on C2. Now they call this thing the axis because the head, when you turn your head from side to side, the atlas is spinning from side to side, rotating on the axis or that dens, that odontoid process. Okay, so the atlas pivots on the axis or on C2. A lot of things on here are still the same as we've seen before. There is a small body here. These articular facets are going to articulate with the bottom of the atlas. And here you see how we have that bifid spinous process where it kind of splits at the back. And the transverse foramen we've talked about already with our previous slides. Okay, so C1 atlas, C2 axis. Those are the only vertebrae in the vertebral column that have their own special names. Then we get down to this guy. We have the sacrum and the coccyx. There's really not a ton to say about the sacrum and the coccyx, at least for our purposes. Basically, it's the end of the vertebral column. Now, with these things, a couple of things that you do need to know. Number one, right at the top of the sacrum, um, basically you'll see these articular facets. Those are the same things that we would find on most of the vertebrae. So these right here will articulate with the inferior articular facets of L5, or the lowest lumbar vertebra. Okay, the sacral canal. This basically the spinal cord ends, and then nerves travel down this sacral canal and allow communication between the spinal cord and the lower part of our body. The sacral hiatus, this is an opening down at the down at the bottom of the sacrum. This allows nerves to exit, and again, with that communication. And all these foramina that you see here, these holes, those again are passages for nerves and arteries. The sacrum actually starts off as 5 individual vertebrae when you are born. That's part of the reason we have 33 bones in our spinal cord when we're born. Okay, between the ages of 16 and 26, this whole thing will fuse together to form one big bone, or the sacrum. This forms the back wall of the pelvis. So when we talk about the pelvis, we'll discuss this more. Then the coccyx, this thing down here, this is your tailbone. Again, it starts as 4 fused vertebrae, and it will fuse around the same age, between the ages of 16 and 26. So you guys all might have some cocci or sacrum that have not completely fused together to form those very solid, rigid bones in the back of your body. That's pretty much it for the sacrum and the coccyx. And that is the rest of our vertebral canal. So if you have questions, as always, let me know.